Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. A few months ago I made a series about poetry magazines, and I made two separate series. One was for paper poetry magazines and the other one for online poetry magazines. There are so many online poetry magazines that I decided to just leave it there for now and recommended a resource called Shearsman, where you can go and see what magazines have a submission window open for your work and find the best match. So while I recommend using Shearsman, I still wanted to show you more paper poetry magazines. And these are magazines that I've never had a subscription to, and therefore I'm slightly less familiar with. But a friend of mine keeps sending me her old issues of those magazines so that I can have a look at them. And I've collected 8 new magazines that I would like to show you. And some of them are pretty big poetry publications, so really worth knowing. And if you're not able, for some reason, to look at the actual magazines yourself, this will give you a little glimpse into them. You can also see them at the National Poetry Library in London, if that's accessible to you, and some bookshops sometimes hold them as well. Before you submit to a magazine, it's always worth having a look at what they actually publish and reading an issue or two just to get a feel for them, but also to support the magazine in question, because without readers they can't really survive. After all, the whole point of a magazine is to be read, and they need people to buy and borrow the magazine. These are also great if you're interested in poetry, to get a feel for what contemporary poetry has to offer. It can be really exciting to hold a new magazine and have, the latest poems from contemporary poets, and just to be able to see what is being written, by whom. Different magazines appeal to different readers and writers. So hopefully this video will help you find out which is the best fit for you. The first magazine here is Shearsman. Shearsman is solely a poetry magazine. It's edited by Tony Fraser, and it's been running since the early 1980s. So it's one of the older poetry magazines out there. It's quite a nice length, and you just get page after page of poetry. There are no essays, no other forms. It's just pure poetry. Another magazine I really like is Tears in the Fence. Tears in the Fence is a little thicker, and it has essays as well as poems. You can see a longer essay here at the end, but the first part is all poetry. Tears in the Fence is only slightly younger than Shearsman. It started in 1984. And as I said, they specialize in poetry, but maybe in a slightly broader sense. So for example, you get prose poems as well as translations, new poetry, flash fiction, a bit of non-fiction. And there are reviews and essays at the end by poetry critics. Next, and another really good one, is Under the Radar. Under the Radar has more than poetry. It has poetry, fiction, and reviews. There's a pretty decent poetry section at the start in this issue. It's about half the issue, just filled by poetry. And then some short fiction, and at the end there are some reviews. So you get a bit of fiction there as well as poetry, and the reviews help you navigate new pamphlets and poetry collections that have been published by getting some critics' view on what is worth paying attention to. Under the Radar is the poetry magazine that belongs to Nine Arches Press, whereas Tears in the Fence, for example, is totally independent. This is published by a poetry publisher, which is often the case with poetry magazine. That's also the case with Shearsman. They publish books as well as their magazine. But some, like Tears in the Fence, are just their own magazine. Now, I really wasn't familiar with The Dark Horse, which is a Scottish poetry magazine that was founded in 1995 by Jerry Cambridge. The whole magazine is focused on poetry. However, there is a lot of space given over to essays, interviews, and reviews. I'd say maybe 1/3 of it is just poems, and then the rest is taken up by longer form essays, reviews, interviews, talking about poems. So it's all poetry, but it's not all poems. This one is definitely worth a look, and I would like to keep a closer eye on it. Next is a really well-known one, which is Poetry Wales. At least I hear a lot about it. Poetry Wales has a really nice cover. Poetry Wales is even older than the other magazines we've seen. It started in 1965. It publishes contemporary poetry, features and reviews. It comes out 3 times a year. A bit like the Dark Horse, it has space for poems, but also a lot of space given over to longer form essays. And there are black and white pictures that I really enjoy, which wasn't the case in the magazines we've talked about so far. So photography also has some space in here, which I think is very enjoyable when you hold a magazine that also has pictures. Poetry Wales is very well respected, and you will find a lot of very good poets in there. This is the summer 2019 issue, and I can recognize several of the names in this issue, including Paul Stevenson, whom we've just interviewed on the channel, so have a look at that interview. Next is another big name, which is the White Review. The White Review is really beautiful to hold. I like the format of the magazine a lot. It's got fancy paper, and some pages with really beautiful arts are included. Yes, even color printing brought to the poetry world. Now, the White Review doesn't just publish poetry. The White Review defines itself as an arts and literature magazine. It comes out 3 times a year, and within it you will find fiction as well as poetry, art and essays. There are interviews, there is translation work, so it's got a broader scope. I would say if you like to buy yourself a magazine for the summer holiday, you could consider getting something like the White Review instead, and you will be able to read some of the best contemporary poetry and fiction, look at art, and just have a great time reading it. This is also a big shot. It's the PN Review. The PN Review are celebrating their 50th birthday, which also makes them one of the older magazines out there. They used to be called Poetry Nation, and they publish new poetry, older poetry, commentary, literary essays, interviews and reviews from around the globe. They also have 3 issues a year. They have these beautiful covers. They're a little thinner, more like the size of Poetry London, and the paper is similar to Poetry London as well, actually. And this is what it looks like inside. So again, you get some poems, but also some essays and other articles. Different magazines will appeal to different readers depending on the type of poetry you are attracted to, and also if you like reading essays as well, or just the poems. Finally, there is a new magazine out there. This is the 2nd issue of Cerasus. I'm not sure that's how it's pronounced, but that's how I will pronounce it for now. It's edited by John Wilkes. Cerasus Poetry is a small press publisher of contemporary verse. So it specializes in poetry, and it also publishes pamphlets and poetry collections, as well as this magazine. And the reason why I have this magazine is that I submitted a pamphlet manuscript for the prize. I was shortlisted, and they featured the long-listed and shortlisted poets in the pages of this magazine. So if you want to see some of my poems, 2 of them are in this magazine. You can see the shortlist here. So if you want to see that, I will put the link below. I'll put all the links below, not just this one, and you can go and buy the magazine. So I really hope you find something to like in these magazines. Do have a look at the playlist where you will see many other magazines you can read or submit to. Let me know if you would like a video about how to submit poetry or other pieces to magazines specifically. If any of you need help with that, I'd be happy to know. Let me know in the comments if you are interested in one of these or other poetry magazines out there, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video very soon. Bye!